Welcome back, everyone. This is Sarah Young with Check My Church, where we check Christian churches and ministries for red flags of abuse and cult-like control to protect the sheep and stop feeding the wolves. We spoke to Allicia Young a couple weeks ago, former member of Solid Rock at Market Common, which was Mica Miller's former church, and we wanted to keep talking because there's just so much beneath the surface of what's going on at Solid Rock that should be discussed. And I think it's like Robbie Harvey says, that I totally agree with. Whether Micah Miller pulled the trigger or somebody else did, we need to focus on why the trigger was pulled. And I think it was pulled because Micah Miller was in a cult. She was trapped in a cult and she was trying to get out. That's what I think. But this time we're going to talk about cult love bombing because it's one of the first things you can check when trying a new church or really any group. So what was your experience at Solid Rock as far as love bombing goes? Is that something you noticed happening there or something you experienced when you and your husband first started going?
I did, because in the beginning it was, they were so excited to have us, and because John Paul had expressed that with my husband, he was so excited to have him. He had been praying for somebody like him, and that he just really wanted them to be best friends, and that was the goal was, we're gonna be best friends. But especially with me, it was, oh, we're so excited to have you. We can't wait to get you plugged in. And then I never got plugged in anywhere.
Mm,
And it was just kind of saying things to my face, basically gaslighting me also of, you know, there's certain things, certain steps that we have to do from to get you from point A to point B. And I was going through these steps, and it just felt like I was jumping through never ending hoops because it was not getting me anywhere.
yeah, that's really interesting. I've experienced the same thing in one-on-one relationships that turned out to be, I would say, abusive. The whole we're going to be best friends thing. I've heard that multiple times from different people, and it's a huge red flag for me. I think it's a love bombing tactic. Oh, we're just going to be best friends,
Mhm.
and I've been waiting for someone like you. It's also interesting how after they love bombed you guys, you really felt like they had discarded you in a way, like they were no longer interested in having you there because they made it so difficult for you and gave you all these hoops to jump through. I've heard of that happening with other people in other churches too. Did that happen pretty quickly, like immediately after they got you in, or did it take some time for that, I guess, the going full circle on you?
I would say probably at least 2 to 3 months in, because in the beginning I hadn't seen any red flags. My eyes weren't open quite yet when we first got there. But quickly after, at least 2 to 3 months in, is when I started to really feel like, okay, they don't want me. They don't want anything to do with me. They just want my husband.
Mm,
And, especially with the way I was treated, because my husband could walk hand in hand down the church hallway and they would greet him. They would be like, "Oh, hey, Ken, how's it going? Good morning," things like that. I'm standing right next to him, and never would anyone acknowledge me. And I would look at him and I'm like, can you see me? Like, am I visible? And he would laugh. He would kind of laugh, and I'm like, no, I'm serious. Like, I'm being treated like I'm absolutely invisible. And one particular thing that happened, and this was like that November of 2019. So so there were small groups, and we were part of this one small group. And after your, I think it was like 6 to 7 weeks, something like that, of a small group. And then after the small groups were done, they would hold a dinner for those small groups, and the dinner would be, led by the facilitators of the small groups. And so we were there, and the church, was already basically kind of decorated for Christmas time. And so we were in the fellowship hall, and there was a Christmas tree in the fellowship hall, and it had pictures of everybody in the church. So I was looking at the tree, and it had pictures of everybody in the church on it, everybody except for me. And
Wow.
I saw at least three different pictures of my husband, but it wasn't just him by himself. Like there was one picture of him and a friend that we used to be friends with. And I knew for a fact that someone had to go on my husband's Facebook to get that picture. And I'm like, if they could get a picture like that, why couldn't they get one of me? And I
Right.
looked through this tree so many times. I'm like, maybe I just missed it. Maybe I overlooked it. Surely this is not the case. And I looked through that tree several different times on different days that I was at the church. And absolutely, there was not one photo of me on that tree, which showed me John Paul truly did not want me to be seen in that church.
That's unbelievable. So, in the beginning, when he was love bombing, was it mainly just directed at your husband? Did you feel that love bombing at all, or was it just towards him and you were kind of just there for the ride, if so to speak?
I felt it was kind of a little bit of both, because with me, they're like, oh, you can get we can get you plugged in here and there. Again with the, we're so glad that you're here and we can't wait to get to know you and everything. But John Paul never got to know me
Mm,
ever. So basically the majority of it was directed to my husband, and I was kind of there for the ride. And once I started noticing things, I'm just like, you have to be kidding me, because even 6 months in, a lady thought I was new, and there were other people who thought I was new. And that's when I was really getting so frustrated because I'm like, I'm not new. I've been here the entire time. But they were so blinded by things. And I'm sure that there was things that they were told, because of just the way they acted, because at least just a handful of people only knew my name in the church, and everyone else just directed their comments or whatever towards my husband, and I just basically felt non-existent.
wow. And that was pretty immediate for you. But
Yes,
for your husband, so did it take him a little bit longer than you to sort of see the problems at Solid Rock because they did so much more love bombing directed at him?
it did, and it was frustrating for me because I'm like, are you not seeing the same things that I am? But also, my husband's like, well, let's just give them the benefit of the doubt, and I understand that. But honestly, I felt we were past that point of giving
Hmm.
them the benefit of the doubt. Like in the beginning, I totally get that, because I go into situations with an open mind, but I'm also very, very aware of things, too. My discernment is pretty strong. That's one thing that I'm very thankful that God has given me a very strong discernment. So my husband and I, I'll be honest, we did fight a lot during that period because of the church and how strongly they were trying to divide us the entire
Mm,
time.
that's interesting. So they love bombed your husband, and he probably felt obligated to stick up for them because of how nice they were to him. And
Yes.
obviously, it was causing problems. And I see cult love bombing as false empathy and fake affection and, flattery, over the top compliments that you're bombarded with when a cult is trying to recruit you into their cause. And but one of the ways that I can tell when it's love bombing and not like authentic is if there's strings attached and if it's
Hmm.
not genuine. And with you, obviously it wasn't genuine at all because they said all these nice things and then immediately you felt like they're just full of it because they're not following through with anything they said they wanted. But
Exactly.
with your husband, it seemed like they were more invested in in putting on this uh, love bombing a little bit longer to get, at least, if not to keep him there longer or to keep him there at all, to divide you two and to get him on their side.
For sure. So, with my husband, they they basically put him on a pedestal in a way, and I was kind of down at the bottom. Basically with my husband, they were interested in his giftings, because he is very talented and he had at least 15, almost like 20 years of worship leading experience.
Wow.
So they saw him, especially John Paul saw him as a shiny new toy, and he was already polished and ready to go out of the box, because that's what John Paul wanted was
Mm,
these musicians that were polished and ready to go, because it was all about the show. And
right.
so even, John Paul had my husband even write a few of the parodies and stuff. And John Paul actually got jealous over one of the parodies that my husband wrote because of how well received it was. Like everybody was like, "Oh my goodness, that was so good." And they just kept complimenting him on it. And John Paul got really, really jealous, and we saw it that day. Like he couldn't stand it that someone else was getting attention because he usually, I do believe, wrote the parodies and stuff. And then when my husband started writing some, that kind of quickly ended because of John Paul's jealousy.
So you think the jealousy was kind of the beginning of the end of the love bombing? As soon as he saw, oh, this shiny new toy that I wanted as a sort of ornament for my empire is outshining me.
Yes.
And he must not have seen you as some kind of benefit to the ministry. Like you weren't coming in with something that he wanted to use.
Nope. Even though I have different giftings and talents of my own, John Paul absolutely wanted nothing to do with it because every time I would ask my husband, because my husband would have conversations with John Paul on my behalf, because John Paul would never sit down with me and talk to me about these things. He never would. He always wanted my husband to say things for him.
Hmm.
So, when my husband would ask him like, "Hey, why is she not able to do this or this like she's wanting to like she's wanting to serve in these areas," and John Paul every time would be, "Well, she has issues that she has to work on first and she's got to do this or this or this first." And so when my husband would relay that to me, I would get so frustrated because it was just never ending hoops. I'm like, I'm doing this and this and this, and it doesn't matter. And to say that I was the one who had issues
Hmm.
was just kind of like a slap in the face because I'm thinking, well, there's other things going on that I see. And
Hmm.
John Paul doesn't want me to see anything else behind that curtain, so he's keeping me from doing anything.
Yeah, I believe very firmly that wolves are very aware of who is a threat to them and who will be a benefit to them.
Hmm.
And they just will love bomb anyone that they think will be a benefit to them. But anyone that's a threat to them, they stay very far away from. I mean, and that's true in nature and in this scenario. And I think he probably sensed that you would not only be not beneficial to him, but you would probably cause problems. So he just wanted to stay as far away from you as possible, is what it sounds like to me. But another question I had was, what's like the greeting situation there? Because a lot of churches that I go to, I mean, I see it as love bombing when you've got the sign holders outside that say, "Welcome home," and
Hmm.
we're so glad you made it, and you look amazing today. So what's the greeting situation at Solid Rock, or at least when you were there?
When I was there, they didn't really have parking attendants at the time. They did have security, they did have door greeters and stuff because you could enter the church through two different ways. You could go through the back that will take you through the fellowship hall and everything leading to the sanctuary, or the front door that just leads you directly into the sanctuary. Because the back door eventually it gets locked. And so once service starts, you can't go in through that door. You have to go through the front. But greeting and everything, there were people, you know, who would say, "Oh, I'm so glad you're here," which is normal for every church. But the thing, with us, it was they greeted my husband. They might have said hi to me. There were some people that are like, "Oh my gosh, you look so pretty today," and I'm thinking, okay, because it was weird in how it was done. Because I do remember the one time it was when I was really starting to lose weight, and I felt comfortable with myself, and I had this really cute black dress on, did my hair, had really cute boots on with it. And even John Paul that day, he looked at me and he's like, "Wow, you look very pretty today," which he would never give me compliments. Never.
Mm.
And that one morning he did. And I'm like, I I honestly I really didn't know what to think about it because he never gave me compliments. And then that one Sunday, "Oh, you look really pretty today." Um, okay, thank you.
Well, he seems like
Yeah.
someone who's really interested in appearances, right? So
Yes. Yes.
so
So it
you
was,
you get rewarded for looking good.
yeah,
Um,
because I was starting to lose weight and I was feeling a little bit more confident in myself. And I think he saw that. Yeah, because in the beginning when we went there, I was heavy,
mhm,
and I felt kind of insecure with myself because I didn't look like what they wanted.
right. And he always talked about how he wanted I don't remember the context of the sermon where he said this, but he talks about having a hot wife
Hmm.
and wanting to help others get a hot wife who loves Jesus or something. And
Oh
so
yeah.
I found that like insane. But very clearly from that, it's obviously really important to John Paul that women look a certain way. And maybe in a way, his complete lack of attention towards you or his behavior towards you was because, you didn't live up to what he wanted you to look like on the outside. And then once he saw that you lost weight and were putting more effort into your appearance because you felt better about yourself, he wanted to compliment you for that, as a manipulation. That's kind of how I see it anyway. It's like, okay, she's doing what I think is good. She looks good, so I'm going to be nice to her now. It's really childish, but that's how wolves work, I think, is they care about the appearances. And if you're willing to care about appearances too, then they'll be nice to you.
Oh yeah, definitely. He even mentioned one time, when I had to be a part of that little hype choir before I was allowed to do anything else. And John Paul would even mention to my husband, "Why isn't she smiling enough? She's not smiling enough." Like he literally wanted a
Mm,
smile
yeah,
plastered on my face the whole time. And I'm like, I'm not that type of person that just smiles all the time. Even if I am like happy, it's my face. Like I don't have a smile constantly on it. And so there were times where I knew, like, John Paul would literally watch me while I was up there in this stupid choir. He would literally watch me. And so there were some Sundays that I was very aware that he was watching me. And so I myself would make sure I was doing the right things, that I had a smile on my face. Because then the Sundays I
mm,
did have a smile on my face the whole time, John Paul would be like, "Oh, you did so good up there. Like you were smiling." And I'm just like, "Yeah, I'm doing what you want me to do."
right. And another part of the whole love bombing thing with you and your husband is the offer of jobs and positions and a platform through the church to do what you want to do. I've seen that with a lot of other churches and ministries. They offer you all these things, we'll give you your own podcast. You can be a leader on the worship team. You can have a job in this other business owned by the pastor, which we know was a situation for you guys with the piano bar. And it
Mhm.
seems great when you don't know anything about the organization or the people, like, wow, they're being so generous. But then you feel trapped and stuck there when you're faced with their abusive or inappropriate behavior and you are uncomfortable and you want to leave. But from what I know about your experience at Solid Rock, that's pretty much what happened to you and your husband is you started seeing these things, but then, your husband really felt hesitant because they were so love bomby towards him.
They were, and we had to be extra careful because of where my husband was working at the time and who his boss was, since his boss was basically John Paul's best friend. And so there were certain things, even though when my husband finally was starting to see things and we didn't agree, we had to be so careful of what we said, or even when we left the church, we had to leave quietly because of how the church and the bar were so intertwined with each other. And my husband at the time, he didn't want to risk losing his job and essentially not having somewhere to work and everything. So it was a very, very tricky situation for us when we were there, and to not rock that boat. And it sucked for me because I'm thinking, no, I want to say something. I want to expose this for what it is because other people need to know. And I had to keep quiet at the time.
Yeah, and I noticed with some of the screenshots that have surfaced of texts from JP to Micah that he did
Mhm.
a lot of love bombing with her too, showering her with gifts and, you know, talking about the new plane and going from calling her horrible names and making all sorts of threats and ultimatums in their relationship to flattering her and offering her the world if she'd just come back to him. Did you,
Yeah,
yeah, did you observe that personally? Were you aware that that was going on between them as a married couple?
I did not, because he was he was usually always very complimentary of Micah, always, giving her
Hmm.
some sort of compliment all the time, either while he was in the pulpit or at dinner and everything, overly at times complimentary of his wife, and not to say that can be a bad thing, but knowing who John Paul is and now seeing it is for what it is, it was definitely gaslighting and love bombing. And or all the time, look at my wife. Like it was always a look at my wife, look how hot she is.
Mm.
And I'm just like, as a pastor, yes, you need to love your wife as, God loves the church, but also when a pastor is standing in the pulpit and he's saying how hot his wife is, that's fleshly. And why on earth would you want other men to look at your wife in that way?
Right? Yeah. That's interesting though that you mentioned how he would compliment her so much when, a lot of what's being said right now about him is that he would do a lot of bashing and he did do this. He did a lot of bashing at the pulpit of her and others. So it's like he builds you up, love bombs, and then tears you down again if you don't, I guess, obey his standard.
Yes,
But
because even when we left, or actually it wasn't even when we left. It was there was a the meeting that we had and everything, and immediately it was either after the meeting we had or the email that my husband sent to John Paul expressing the concerns, especially with how I was being treated. And my husband's boss was even like, why don't you just apologize, and make this, right or whatever. And my husband's like, no, these things need to be talked about. This needs to be discussed. And he just kept saying, just, you know, just just apologize, talk it out or whatever. And that's how much that they wanted him to stay in the church. And, even the question of, oh, you're going to fall on the sword for your wife. And my husband's like, yes, absolutely. That's my wife. And it was obvious that neither one of them would ever choose their wife over something else.
Wow. And that's interesting that they consider just having a conversation and confronting, inappropriate behavior or rudeness or mistreatment as falling on the sword.
Yeah.
Like you can't even have a disagreement. You must. But the other thing is he expected your husband to apologize and you guys to apologize. But for what? What if I don't understand what they thought you needed to apologize for?
And they essentially they thought that we were in the wrong. And because there was even an email sent to someone at the church that my husband was friends with. It was actually Micah's brother, that my husband and him were pretty close. And John Paul sent him an email stating that we weren't basically that we weren't going to fall in line, and that he just needed to share this information with him of, you might want to rethink of who you're friends with and stuff, and
Hmm.
told him that, if we couldn't do this or this or this, then we didn't want to have anything to do with the church. And that absolutely was not true at all. It was, my husband was confronting John Paul of how I was being treated, how things were in the church and everything, and it needed to be talked about and everything. Because even in that meeting, John Paul looks at me and he says, "You're not good enough, and your heart is not in the kingdom," which meant I wasn't giving enough money.
Hmm.
And for a pastor to say to someone, "You're not good enough," first of all, what gives you the right to say that to somebody?
Right.
And then I truly knew how he felt about me at that point by him saying that stuff. And I think it was the day after that meeting, or even 2 days later, he came to the house and he said, "Well, I want to apologize for my actions and everything in that meeting. I didn't handle it right."
Hmm.
And I was like, "Okay, thank you for apologizing." And I looked at him and I said, "You mentioned that you don't think my heart is in the kingdom." I said, "If you would just get to know me and get to know who I am, you would know where my heart is at." And as I'm saying these things, he is inching his way closer to that door. And by the time I was pretty much almost done, he was already at the front door and he's like, "Okay, I'm gonna leave. I'll see you guys later." He truly did not want to hear anything I had to say.
Yeah.
So that
Inching away.
apology, yeah, that apology, honestly, it meant nothing to me because
Right.
his actions were no different.
Well, it's just like his love bombing of you initially, right? It just didn't mean anything to you,
Yeah.
because he wasn't going to follow through with any of it. It was just
No.
words.
Yep.
Okay. Have you noticed since leaving Solid Rock, have you noticed any of this kind of love bombing behavior at other churches you've been to, either before or after Solid Rock?
Yes. So after we left Solid Rock and everything, and we're trying to heal from the situation and stuff, my husband had gotten back in contact with a pastor that he had known for quite some time, at least 15 years. He used to be his worship leader. They had a falling out, but they got reconnected in 2020. Well, actually, towards the end of 2019 into 2020. And we essentially moved from Myrtle Beach to Oklahoma and stuff to help him with starting his church. It was starting out as like a home church, and my
Mm.
husband was going to do the worship and help with the media and stuff like that. And once again, he only wanted my husband for his giftings. He didn't want anything to do with me. He actually, at one point, because we found this out later, he told his son that I had Jezebel all over me. Yeah, and when asked to do certain things, he never asked me to really do anything. It was all asking my husband to do everything. And again, I was just kind of along for the ride, and. I was starting to see things behind closed doors. And I would tell my husband, I said, if this is what ministry is like, I do not want any part of it.
Yeah.
Because it was just he was very self-seeking,
Hmm.
and he wanted, again, it was about money. And
Yep.
if you were giving money, he was all about you. And once we stopped giving money, he basically tossed us to the side. We were no longer valuable to him anymore.
Yeah. And I see it in a lot of churches too. And the reason I ask that is because I really think it's important for people to realize that this is not unique to Solid Rock, even though it's happening at Solid Rock. Cult love bombing is happening in so many churches, and it is extremely common. But I think another thing that would be helpful in encouraging people is to talk about how did you and your husband overcome the feelings, or rather your husband, because you didn't feel obligated to them because they didn't love bomb you really that much. But how did your husband overcome those feelings, if you could, dare I say, speak for him, of feeling love bombed and obligated to the church when you guys decided to leave? Like, what was the last straw where the love bombing was no longer an issue and it was just like, We've got to go. This is no, we're done."
I think with the meeting that we had and stuff, it kind of truly showed who John Paul was and everything. But also, my husband actually, what kind of made him wake up in a sense was he had a dream about me. God gave him this dream of, my husband saw me, and there was like all these snakes around me, and it was kind of like whispers and everything, that, what some people do, like there's snakes in the grass. And there, in that dream, he saw the snakes around me, but the whispers of people essentially talking about me behind my back in
Mm.
in the church and stuff. And when he told me about that dream, he was like, "Oh my goodness, this is what's going on." I said, "I've been trying to tell you this the whole time." Um, but it took that to him to finally see things that were happening, and the treatment that was happening to me and stuff. So once his eyes were fully open to that,
Mm.
he then started to really rethink things, and he's like, we have to get out of here. Like, we have to leave.
Yeah,
Because it was no longer of, oh, let's just try to give them the benefit of the doubt. It was actual real division that they were trying to create between me and my husband.
right. Yep. And well, it's like you said, your husband chose you over the church, and for a church to think that a husband and wife would divide over them is, I mean, that's quite some entitlement and audacity, but that's exactly how cult leaders feel. They think that they're the most important thing in your life. But beware the cult love bomb.
Yes, yes,
It's really easy to see once you know what it is and when you know what you're looking for. But I know how hard it is to see the red flags and walk away, especially when you're under the influence of being love bombed, because you want to be nice to these people who are being so nice to you. Sometimes, even when we see them and recognize them for what they are, we get sucked in because we think we're just being paranoid, or maybe we're being too judgmental. And our tendency to be loving and give people a chance to prove us wrong can get us caught and gets us sucked in. But until next time, thank you again, Allicia.
yes. Thank you for having me.